Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Professor Hamamoto. It is March 29th, year 2022, 3 p.m. Pacific time. I hope you're doing marvelously well. Welcome to the live chat today. I'm sorry, I've read a couple of you, or one person said you're not getting the notification. I don't know how to explain that, but I will tell you that I'm here regularly, God willing, twice a week, Tuesday, Thursday, 3 p.m. Pacific time. So if you just set your clock or your calendar to those two special days per week, you'll get a original live chat. And of course, it's recorded and it's going to be part of the record, the historical record. You'll get it twice a week of highly original. I won't say highly original. That doesn't make any sense. Original material drawn from a multitude of sources. Some first person, as we'll talk about in a moment, but mostly secondary and tertiary sources that don't get a lot of attention, in my estimation. In other words, I go out of my way not to repeat or replicate or serve as an echo chamber to a lot of the material. I don't want to waste your time, and it's boring to me as well to go over the same ground. And besides, there's so much new information and new connections that need to be made. About 30 seconds just prior to going live today, the penny dropped, so to speak, about the connection between a quartet, maybe five of them, five key American filmmakers who were integral to the propaganda filmmaking process during World War II, who after World War II were further charged with the responsibility of rehabilitating the U.S., West Germany, that is, and the U.S.-European relationship, political economic relationship. I'll flesh that out in a moment here, but first of all, I wanted to welcome you here today and launch right into the topic of the day, which is concerning Audrey Hepburn. And of course, as you probably can figure out, I'm interested, in Audrey Hepburn as an actress, as an artist, as an internationally known celebrity, as we call them today. Back then, celebrity wasn't anywhere as close to what it is today. And the people who were creating these celebrities were discovering something new about the domestic, that is the American audience, and the world audience, and that is that celebrity sells, right? By the time we roll around to the 60s and certainly the 70s, all the psychology, the mass psychology of the audience had been pretty much worked out. And again, it harkens back to the research that was done just prior to World War II, during the interwar period between World War I and World War II, and it was operationalized in World War II, during World War II, and in the immediate aftermath, which is where I come along. I'm part of the baby boom generation, and we were the first cohort that was subjected to it's called full spectrum dominance, but I will call it full spectrum psychological targeting through the media. And part of it was television. I'm part of the television generation. My parents only got a little bit through radio and film. They were still part of the literate and oral history tradition. But by the time I came along, I was absorbing Audrey Hepburn movies by default, because the content of early television, and those of you who are boomers will know what I'm talking about. The content of early television was early movies or movies of the previous 10, 15 years. So I was watching on television the movies that my parents had grown up with. And this is true for Audrey Hepburn. Of course, I followed her career that started to taper off towards the end, as we'll talk about. And I only really started because I watched her on these movies playing, and they'd also have these commercials like every 10, 15, 20 minutes. So you couldn't really get absorbed in it. And only later did I go and rewatch her films to understand the whole film history. And I guess it should be no surprise that I did personally, professionally, I went into television studies and I went into film studies itself because I had gone through the process and I wanted to understand objectively what I had been subjected to as a child and what this really meant in the context of the larger New World Order. Yes, Natalie Wood, I'll say it. Natalie Wood was, and I don't know if she realized, I think she did. She never admitted to it, of course. But Natalie, I'm sorry, did I say Natalie Wood? I mean, Audrey, she's also one of them, maybe, because I tend to conflate a lot of these actresses from the 50s. Audrey Hepburn was a tool of the post-war New World Order, culminating, because you see it in the headline here, I call it UN globalist humanitarianism, but she was a tool of UNICEF, United Nations Children's Fund, which not coincidentally got underway in 1946. And those, everybody here in the chat knows about the National Security Act of 1947. Do you think that all this was going down by coincidence around the same time? No, no, no. Yeah, you know this, so I'm not going to insult your intelligence by belaboring the point. But that's not the only similarity. There's a multitude of them here, which leads me to believe that my analysis of the Audrey Hepburn phenomenon is far more perceptive, on point, and deep and accurate than any other film historian or so-called film studies expert. I don't care if they know what color underwear that Audrey Hepburn knew just the minutia every day, what she did in her life. I don't care. And I don't call that knowledge necessarily. I call that information. I call that data. I'm talking about a synthetic, not a meaning false, but a overarching understanding, analysis of what people like this represent historically. And that's why I call this method cultural forensics. And I use my patented, it's not patented, but it is copyrighted, my technique that I've developed over the decades that I call cultural forensics to help explain our current situation in 2022 on the brink of perhaps nuclear annihilation. And remember when Audrey Hepburn was raised to prominence, we were in the midst, I mean, the high point of the Cold War, where people, I was a kid back then, we were afraid of nuclear holocaust. We practiced how to duck and cover in the classroom. I think it was the last Friday of the month, the air raid siren would sound and we'd hit the floor. And I mean, it was part of our culture, in other words. So younger people today probably don't understand it because they're inured to it because they're in a permanent state of crisis, not just episodic crisis like we were exposed to, but it's now non-stop crisis because the behavioral scientists realize that you have to treat the population to perpetual fright with certain punctuation marks in between. They have to be have their adrenal glands at a perpetual state of being half drained because they're scared, witless most of the time. There's an antidote for that, though. And this is what the behavioral psychologists have not been able to figure out yet. They're trying to impose it from the big tech area, and that's censorship. But the antidote to this perpetual fright, this fear factor, right? Didn't Joe Rogan host a show called Fear Factor? I think he's continuing on that trajectory. I don't know what the big deal about Joe Rogan is because he is a tool of the New World Order himself. I think he was promoting ayahuasca yesterday, and today he's promoting, anti-New World Order awareness. So it's like a Dr. Robert Malone. They make it on the way up and they make it on the way down. It's like Audrey Hepburn. They make it on the way up and they make it on the way down. That's how they roll. And of course, we are being pushed down continually. Our energies, our spirits, our minds, our behavior, our health being held down. Yeah, that's pretty heavy agenda for someone like Audrey Hepburn, who, not myself, but a lot of people in my generation and my parents' generation idolized her and worshipped her to the point where I think it was Barack Hussein Obama, another synthetic character, as you know, right? Gave her the American Medal of Freedom. I don't even know if she ever became an American citizen or not. And even as a child, I thought she was British, and she indeed has this connection, but in a way that I only got specifics about. She was schooled at an early age. And she was very lonely because, I feel a little bit sorry for her. Her father, for the most part, I think in effect abandoned her family when she was only 6 years old. She had two older brothers, but she was 6 years old, and she talks about the pain of a parent just kind of disappearing. He didn't die. He just fled to England. I think he was Irish by birth. And the mother, as you will learn in a moment, comes from Dutch nobility. And maybe epigenetically, this is why she carried herself like royalty, because I think her mother's sister, which would be her aunt, married into the family of the Queen of the Netherlands, Queen Wilhelmina, who, by the way, spent I think all of the war, World War II, in Britain, going on the radio every once in a while to broadcast to the partisans back home in German-occupied Holland. And Audrey Hepburn, which I didn't know about. I mean, I heard bits and pieces, but not in such great detail. Thanks to this book here. Here it is. It's called Dutch Girl. And there's an agenda behind it, as I'll talk about. I won't go too deeply into it. Anybody who writes a book, it has an agenda. You just have to assume that. You have to just figure out what it is. There's really no such thing as historical objectivity. That's not saying that you have to, everything's a piece of propaganda and it's just all out lies and fabrication. But everybody has a subject position, and it's going to bring some kind of prejudice, bias, and that's not necessarily bad to the work. So I'm going to try to flesh out what the bias of this author is and why this book was released now. I think Audrey Hepburn died in 1993. She's been gone quite a while now, and many of you who are younger might not even know who she is. You'll know her face, I'm sure, and you might know her movies, but you don't necessarily know her name, and certainly you don't know much about her history, and which I'll talk about today. So this came out in 2020. It's only been out a couple of years now. It's written by a guy named Robert Mattson. When I first started going into the book, I noted that the first 10 years of his professional life was spent at NASA. So that's a red flag right there. You in the chat room know what NASA, you're thinking of paperclip. You're thinking about Wernher von Braun, and not just the rocket scientists, but all the psychiatry. Remember, a couple talks ago, I talked about the massive numbers of Austrian and German, many of them Jewish, most of them Jewish psychiatrists who came over. They weren't part of Paperclip as such, but they were exfiltrated out of Germany and Austria to set up the psychiatric psychology therapeutic asylum here in America, which we're all living in right now. And that's one of the reasons why I'm tackling this historically and culturally forensically, so we can throw off the shackles of bondage of big pharma and the psychotherapeutic establishment, which is spending most of its time trying to gaslight us that, yes, there's a multitude of gender. Gender is on the spectrum. It's, you've heard those stories, so I'm not going to belabor the point here, because you can listen to Don Bongino and Tucker Carlson and all the other shills who are out there just hammering the same stupid, meaningless story. Yeah, we get the point already. What's the end game here? What is really the strategy that's behind it? So what's interesting about, and if I should state that NASA is an intelligence operation, right? You know this through Paperclip. It's not just about shooting rockets. What is it? What does NASA stand for? The National Aeronautics Space Administration. So you're thinking rocket ships and the Jupiter and Cape Canaveral, and later Cape Kennedy, and then Cape Canaveral again. But it's first and foremost, it's an intelligence organization. So someone like this author here, Mattson, who worked for NASA, he's probably got a lot of connections. In fact, he might even be sheep dipped. You know what that means? He might be taking on a new identity as an author to sanitize or to use a lot of this NASA intelligence, especially of the German slash Allied slash Nazi synthesis, and it also is true for Japan. There's a very close working relationship between the Allies and the putative enemy, right? You know this right now. And millions and millions of mostly young men, were killed in the Soviet Union, Germany, all the different. I'm talking about the major warring nations: Japan, the United States, of course, Canada, Britain, of course. Without this knowledge, they thought they were fighting for their country. They didn't know they were really fighting for the United Nations, which was about to be born out of the rubble, and that was part of the plan. The United Nations, which is now, I call it UNATO, United Nations slash NATO. NATO is the enforcement arm of the New World Order, and it's the supranational governing body called the United Nations, which is at the front of this war going on in Russia slash Ukraine, right? So this talk today is quite relevant for what's happening now. And by the way, very soon, while I'm on the topic of NATO, very soon, as I announced, I'm having this author who I'm really interested in. He's Swedish by nationality. His name is Pelle Netroth Taylor. This is one of his books. I have all 4 or 5 in English. I'm not going to have him talk about JFK. A lot of his material on JFK you already know about because he's synthesized. And there's not a lot of original material there. But his take on Brexit, the European Union, and its relationship to American empire. I haven't read all of it yet. He seems to go pretty light on the United Nations and NATO. But the point is, I'm having him as a guest on this show. And since we're talking about guests, ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to state your name because you might want to remain anonymous, but there's one of the frequent or dedicated people in the live stream here who answered my call and got me the contact email for none other than the author, Leo Zagami, and he is indeed going to be on this show all the way live this Thursday at 3 o'clock. Well, 3 o'clock Pacific. So Leo Zagami, in his new book, buy this book. He's got 6 or 7 volumes of similarly titled books. They're all called Confessions of an Illuminati. And oh yeah, this is volume 7. So we're on number 7 here. There's a good one. They're all good. I especially liked the first couple of volumes that were published out here in San Francisco. I want to ask him the specifics about how he got that particular publisher to put his work in English translation. So I'm telling you this because I'm going to ask him questions that no other interviewers are, because I've seen most of them, right? And I want to go over the same ground. Yeah, are you a Freemason? Yeah, I remember that you and Alex Jones met over at the Vatican. You know, I think most of you are in that world and you know about it. So I'm going to ask him more second, you might consider, I call them really important questions, but I'll ask him questions that most of you have not heard of. I'll tell you one right now. I want to know why he's so popular in Japan. 6 of his books have been translated into Japanese language. I have a good idea why he is popular in Japan, but I want to hear it from him. I want to hear his perspective. And I also, if he's listening, Leo, how are you, Mr. Zagami? I'm going to ask you why Palm Springs? Why did you decide to leave Italia and take up La Vida Americano in Palm Springs? And not that anything's bad about it. I just think it's curious. So we're fellow Californians now. You're down there in the sunny Palm Springs, really nice. That's where the Frank Sinatra and a lot of the Rat Pack hanged out. I think the Sinatra estate's still there. I don't know who owns it, but it's a place for, they're regular people there, but a lot of celebrities from LA, because it's not that much of a drive further south, are in the Palm Springs area. And I'm up here in the north in Sacramento, right? Don't cry for me, Sacramento, which is the state capital of California, and one of the blips on the New World Order deal here. So I'm going to be reading more Robert Matson. I've already ordered a book about Carol Lombard, who's an old-time actress. I've seen a lot of her movies, and not all of them, of course, but she's an important figure in this whole star system, I would imagine, especially if she was doing espionage work. And it also, I'm kind of skipping ahead here. It also occurred to me that perhaps Audrey Hepburn, as she was doing as a teenager, because she was educated in England as a younger girl, so she was fluent in English language, and then shortly before the war broke out, it's like 1939, she went back to Holland and settled in the village of Arnhem. By the way, Arnhem became a huge battleground towards the end of the war, 1944. I think the film A Bridge Too Far was featured. That was on, and she was there. They had moved to the outside of town, of course, but she was. I'm talking about Audrey Hepburn. She and her family were hiding out in that particular area, but she was doing a little bit of courier work with the resistance. There was a brave Dutch patriotic resistance fighting the New World Order even back then, and in this case, it wore the face of the Third Reich, right? But she was doing that. But I'm now beginning to wonder if, even as a world famous actress of international renown, she was also performing courier services around the world. She had the wherewithal. No one's going to be really looking at her if they know she is, does she need a passport? No, her face is famous. And they're going to cut the people at the border control are going to give her a wide berth, and she's going to get a pass on a lot of this stuff. So she doesn't need to be carrying documents. She could be passing information verbally because she's going to all the different embassies. She's even meeting with the Pope. She's going to the Vatican in her very first film. It's called Roman Holiday, 1953. It's an oldie but a goodie. I recommend it. Her co-star is Gregory Peck. But in the book, it talks about how this young, inexperienced actress, and she never had a single acting lesson, hard to believe, acting lesson in all her life. And here she is. She's an Academy Award winning. She also won a Tony Award for Broadway. She won an Emmy. She's one of the few celebrities who's won in all these different categories. If I have time, I'll read you some of the honors, but you get the point. She's recognized on, but she didn't have any type of training at all. So what did she have, and how did she get it? And I think I have, and I'm entitled as a researcher, and so are you, anybody. We can make conjectures and we can put out hypotheses for testing, right? You state a hypothesis and you confirm it or you disconfirm it. Now, we're not in the laboratory where you can replicate experiments over and over again, see and test and test. We're dealing with distinct sui generis historic moments here, so we don't have that luxury of testing, but we can still hypothesize. So I'm just telling you that for you. Well, you're just talking through your, what, and making up these stories. No, this is a legitimate form of how any biographer, any researcher really operates, through hypothesis testing and conjecture. And my hypothesis is that she was a international courier, unofficial diplomat without portfolio, informally, through all the different governments in the world, and maybe even some of the enemy governments, because she was a cultural figure. Ostensibly, she was not a politicized individual. So that gave her the ability to perhaps go behind the so-called Iron Curtain when it still existed. So in the Vatican, of course, which has diplomatic status, and as I told you before, this is what got me thinking. She made a trip, and the way it's portrayed in the book, it was more of a courtesy visit, a publicity for them going to, and this is 53. I mean, it was released in 53. The movie was filmed in 52. So Italy and Rome in particular was still trying to recover from the war. And that's how important the Hollywood input was in the reconstruction of European allies, including Italy, which, as you know, Allen Dulles and the OSS, and then the CIA were worried it was going to turn commie, right? You know about Gladio and all the stay behinds. I'm not going to insult your intelligence by repeating it ad nauseum. You know about that. So in order to build the confidence and recognition and intergovernmental and international cooperation, you film a movie called Roman Holiday with Gregory Peck. He was already an international star in his own right with this brand new face called Audrey Hepburn. I say called Audrey Hepburn because she's had a number of identities through her life. As you might imagine, she wasn't born Audrey Hepburn. She was born Andrade Rushton Hepburn, I think was her legal name. Her father, as I mentioned, was an Irish national. Okay, before I burn up too much time, let me talk about some conjectures here. And this, again, I want to get it out on top because I want you to assist in this effort here. My conjecture is that Audrey Hepburn might have been part of a super actor, super performer program, right? Not MK Ultra as such, but in an umbrella generic MK Ultra like type of program, certain people who were targeted, people like Marilyn Monroe, Anthony Perkins, even directors such as let's see, Frank Perry, right? I didn't realize, but Frank Perry was a member of Actors Studio. Now, Audrey Hepburn wasn't part of that. She didn't go through any actor training like I think most of the 50s, Marlon Brando, James Dean, they all came out of a certain actor milieu. And I think that's where a lot of the MK type ultra programming was taking place because Lee Strasberg also I don't know if he required it, but he was really predisposed to having his actors in order to get in touch with their inner self, their demons. Remember, it's method acting, right? You've got to access all those deep repressed memories, hating daddy and wanting to sleep with mommy, and all the homicide. I'm exaggerating. I'm method acting right now. I guarantee you, I did on the job training by teaching and lecturing. I never have been a part of Actor Studio. What you see here is just my own technique that I developed by reading. I read a lot about actor technique, and I read a lot about speaking and acting, and I studied Joel Osteen, and I studied all the televangelists and acting, and I, just like Robert De Niro, go to the zoo and see how monkeys perform with each other, their body language. And I read all about Adolf Hitler had a tutor. He had a person who taught him how to project to large audiences. So I'm self-trained. And apparently so was Audrey Hepburn. I don't think she was self-trained. I think she was getting on the set type coaching and training. How she pulled it off in the theater, I'm not really sure, but we're going to keep researching this. And the reason why I call them super actors is because we already know about super soldiers, right? You know about that. What's his name? It slips my mind. He died. He claimed he was a super soldier. He died on the way to some sort of talk in I don't know where it was. The name will come up here, but that's when I first heard of that concept. Then I found out there was a literature published by the Pentagon and other national military sources that there was a super soldier program. And by the way, super soldier program goes back to the interwar period, just like the psychiatry and psychology that I've referred to. And it was, for the most part, drugs and narcotics based in the interwar period. Most of your American flyers, say most of them, right, in the Army, U.S. Army Air Force, and also the pilots of the Luftwaffe, and also the pilots in the Japanese Imperial Navy Air Force, I think it was part of the Navy. They were all high, man. They were all on speed. They were on really incredibly potent and powerful and refined German narcotics. They were good, Bayer, about Bayer-Gesellschaft and all the whole dye industry, chemical industry, IG Farben in Germany and Austria. And all the great scientists of Japan studied in Germany or Austria, all the chemists and the physicists and all that. And same with the other countries as well. So they're all high. So the super soldier concept goes back to the interwar period and continues to the present. And we know, for example, because I've talked about it here on this channel, about Ted Kaczynski, right? Brilliant 16-year-old in mathematics, got into Harvard as a freshman. He's 16 years old, and he just whizzed through a PhD program. And gosh, he was like in his, I think, mid-20s or late 20s when he was an assistant professor at UC Berkeley before he dropped out. Well, he was a product of a mind control program, a longitudinal study of bright students at Harvard run by Henry Murray. That book is that the documents, it's called Harvard and the Unabomber, Alston Chase. Read about it. So we know about super intellectuals, and we know about super athletes as well. Tiger Woods, I've talked about this before. I'd say I've been doing this for a year and 3 months now. So I've talked about Eldrick Tiger Woods and his father, who was in the special services, who was privy to a lot of this technology, mind control, narcotics. And he himself had a celebrity license. I'm talking about Tiger Woods now, who can travel all over the world. And supposedly, according to the guy who runs the blog In Search of Black Assassins, he was used as a courier. They would put messages through him. And of course, here's another Swedish connection. And Elin Nordgren, whose mother was involved in immigration issues. I'm going to ask Pelle Taylor about Elin Nordgren, Tiger Woods' wife, and his mother and father, who were administrators in Sweden, who helped facilitate the large-scale immigration of Muslims into Sweden as part of the takedown of Sweden as an independent nation, and to tear it down so they'll be more easily swept into this new world order, the UN, NATO order. I'm getting ahead of myself, but it comes to mind that I should talk to him about Elin Nordgren. So you know about the super athletes, you see them, right? And so why not the super actor? We know that Hollywood today is an integral component of domestic and foreign intelligence operations, whether it's Mossad, MI6, and we already know about CIA connection. Today, there's certain personalities who's supposedly in independent media who can't stop talking about the Chat-Coms takeover of Hollywood. Well, you know what? They're a big factor, but so is every other country. I'm not excusing it. I think American films should be made by Americans and about American lives. But I'm interested in your life. I really don't care about Angelina Jolie. I'd like to reach through the screen and tell me the story of your life for 90 minutes and put it on YouTube. And that would be an incredibly gripping piece of cinema. But my name is not Barack Hussein Obama or Michelle Obama. I don't have a multi-million-dollar contract with Netflix to pay them off, right? So I only got Tubu to use, and I'm going to use the tools of the putative master to erode the foundations of their hegemonic control of technology. So I was doing my detective work and found out that Audrey Hepburn, well, she quit acting, I think, in 60. I can't remember the exact date, but she had a really good career. I mean, she could have been acting and making tons of money because of the marquee value of her name. And she was good. I mean, I saw her in Wait Until Dark, I think the movie was, and that's when I really first recognized how good an actor she was or had become. By then she was, I think, in her mid 30s or something. So she had a lot of experience by then. Wait Until Dark, a psychological horror, not this slasher type horror, but the type of horror that's in your mind. It's more difficult to act and to write those types of films, but I'm going to have to watch it again. But not long after that, she retired after her two sons with two different fathers went to school. So she used, and I'm not saying an excuse, but you hear this all the time by politicians who want to leave public office, right? Because either of a scandal, they got caught with a hand in the cookie jar, or their hand, in somebody's pants in the men's room in Congress or something. And so they said, "Well, I'm going to resign office because I want to spend more time with my family." That's a cliche, right? Excuse me a moment. So Audrey Hepburn said, "Yeah, I want to spend time with my kids. They're going to school, and I'm going to retire." But she came out of retirement at age 60, and where did she touch down? She wasn't getting any movie. I think she was in Robin Hood, another remake of Robin Hood with Sean Connery. We're gonna have to go in on Sean Connery one of these days, see what he's all about. But she was co-starring with Sean Connery. You would see, I would think it would be just a magic combination, but the film fell flat for different reasons. And at that point, she realized, I don't want to be in movies anymore. I've aged out of being the ingenue with a 22-inch waist, beautiful face, and a persona that everybody just really dig, including actors and act. I'll just use actor to mean actress and actor. Even actors were intrigued by Natalie Wood. According to this, if I may make a slight digression, in this book, The Men in My Life by Patricia Bosworth, who was, by the way, cast in a role of a lifetime. She was cast in uh, a nun. I think it was called The Nun Story, and it was starring Audrey Hepburn, but she was playing one of the junior nuns. And Audrey Hepburn was very nice to her. I mean, she was super good individual. That's why I don't want to go too get to be personal here. I think she didn't feel good about being an asset. I'm talking about Audrey Hepburn herself, and that's what this book here. I just realized that's what got me to thinking, hey, I'm going to start looking into Audrey Hepburn. What is it about this actor who even other actors were awed by? People like Edith Evans, who later became Dame Edith Evans. She's an actor's actor. She's a stage legend, okay? And so when Edith Evans, who was in the movie A Nun Story, got together with Patricia Bosworth, who was one of the nuns, the younger novitiate, or maybe she was a full-fledged nun, got to talk. They didn't want to talk. She was in awe of Edith Evans. That was a big deal. But Edith Evans couldn't stop talking about, guess who? Audrey Hepburn, who was still tearing it up. So I'm just telling you the stories. That's the type of stature and renown that this girl, who supposedly was a resistance, I won't say fighter because she didn't pick up arms, but she was too young. She was, I think she mentioned she was 10 years old when the Germans came in, Third Reich, the Wehrmacht came into to Holland, which, by the way, this story here should be a cautionary warning to we here in America who've never had foreign occupation, military occupation. That is, we've had financial occupation and other, but outright military occupation, where people are pointing guns at you and beating you up and stealing your food and diverting it to their own home country. We haven't had that, and the people in Holland thought they were going to get away because they were neutral ostensibly. They thought they were going to escape occupation during World War II, just like they had during World War I. But as I told you before, my gosh, Audrey Hepburn and her family were on him, which is one of the last huge battles of World War II. Because the Germans had been driven, the Wehrmacht, I guess it was, and all the other, not all of them, but much of the army had gone north in order to prolong their existence. Of course, eventually it all went south, which I'll talk about in a moment, because there was a whole denazification process that Audrey Hepburn and her family were caught up in. And that's why I allude to the UN globalist humanitarianism. Okay, let me just get to the point right now, right? Lest you tune out and miss really why I'm going in on Audrey Hepburn today. Audrey Hepburn, or her handlers, because I don't think she was making all these decisions herself, in escaping the Third Reich or the Nazis, as they're often called, but I just call them just Third Reich, okay, Germany. In escaping the Third Reich, she went to the Fourth Reich, which is the United Nations and NATO, and that controls UNICEF under the guise of humanitarian. See, the Germans had outright occupation. They use a military. They use kinetic warfare, as I've called it. And I've also made in other settings a distinction between the old school kinetic warfare, tanks, battleships, fighter airplanes, Mausers, you know, equipment that goes bang and boom. That's kinetic versus the genetic warfare of the United Nations, its offshoots like the World Whore Organization, the WHO, and its supposed humanitarian fronts and education fronts like UNESCO or UNICEF. Okay, let me just say, I'm not making fun of the poor, starving people of X, Y, or Z or the exploited children of country X, Y, or Z, right? But I would argue if those countries had been left alone to develop on their own with using a free trade model instead of the old Dutch East Indies rapacious colonial model, they wouldn't need UNICEF. They wouldn't need the United Nations. They wouldn't need UNESCO. They wouldn't need quote unquote foreign aid because they would be trading partners. We would get uranium from the Congo, right? We would get resource A, oil from certain oil-rich countries. We would trade, but they were going by the centuries-old Dutch East Indies program. By the way, let me just take a moment to again tell you why I am interested in Natalie Wood and in this history, because I am a part of it. Yes, I'm an Asian American person, but I'm part of the new world. I'm an integral element of the New World Order history, because the forebears of the von Heemstra family, which was the mother side, the maternal line of Audrey Hepburn, her mother was named Ella von Heemstra, who was an avowed fascist, according to her own published works, which, by the way, the letters are published here, their documents. And she went in 1935 to meet Hitler, along with the Mitford sisters in Britain, the scandalous sisters of Jessica Mitford was sort of the hangout. She was like the liberal, the good one, but the other ones were fascist, right? Because there was something, and this is a term I learned in this book, called lipstick Nazism. There are a lot of lipstick Nazis in the upper classes in Britain. And of course, today or right after the war, they would deny that, oh, no, we were always for crown and country. Oh, no, Hitler? No, of course not. Oswald Mosley? No. But you know what? Audrey Hepburn's father and mother, Ella von Heemstra, who was part of Dutch nobility, married into it and also descended from many generations of stadtholders, right? They hung out with Oswald Mosley, the black shirts, right? There's a whole history there, which I don't need to get into, but let me just finish up this thought. I am part of this history because the Dutch East Indies came into my ancestors' part of the world and tried to take it over. Okay, this book here, it's a good one. It's published by the Amsterdam University Press. Dutch ships in tropical waters. You got it? Dutch ships. And it says the development of the Dutch East India Company shipping network in Asia, 1595 to 1660. That's a long time ago. And as some of you may know, they had an outpost off Nagasaki, which was blown up by the second nuclear bomb, probably to send a warning out, hey, this is America now. The Dutch East India, you're finished, right? This is Nagasaki also had a huge Roman Catholic community, right? So it was a turf war going on there. There was other, because it didn't have any military strategic importance on Nagasaki, but off of the offshore of Nagasaki, and I've been there. I was there for the 50th anniversary, Nagasaki. I've been there since then, but I was there for the 50th of the bombing. I went to Hiroshima, and then I went straight down to Nagasaki, which came 2 days later, and I got there for both ceremonies. Incredible. That should be another talk. But they had an island called Deshima, where the Dutch traders were. the Japanese daimyo, the warlords there, knew all about, through their spy network around Southeast Asia and through China, they knew all about the Jesuits. They didn't know so much about the Calvinists, right? But they thought they could use the Dutch people as kind of a buffer against the Jesuits, because they knew what they had done to China and Macau, places like that. But they kept them on an island. And that's why Japan, even though they're still trying to attack it through nuclear sabotage, that's why it retained sovereignty after World War II. It regained its sovereignty. I don't know what they have planned. I think Japan is probably part of the larger New World Order power system structure. They're going into nanotech, though. That's going to be their assignment. They're going underground. They're going small. They're going bonsai. Nano. They're going transformer. You wonder why all those cool toys are coming out of Japan. Hey, they're workshopping the new technologies for the new world order, for the new system, the new regime, nano world. Anyway, that's another talk as well. So I hope that establishes my bona fides. Okay, I'm part of the story here. And her family got rich off of exploiting primarily Southeast Asia, Indonesian specific. It used to be called Dutch Indonesia. And you and I know a very prominent family of Dutch Indonesians, and they're rock stars, right? And their name is Van Halen, or Van Halen, if you want to say. Eddie and, the late Edward Van Halen, and his older brother, Al, right, Reverend Al, the drummer, whenever they fought, they would fight speaking Dutch. That was their language, right? They came from Indonesia and they went to the Netherlands as kids, and then they came to America and they became rock stars. What a great story, huh? So I'm just telling you what you might view as trivia, but it's not, to show you how this new world order, it's full of weird, strange contradictions and interconnections. Okay. My argument here is very simple, is that Audrey Hepburn, having done her duty and having to live down the humiliation, because there were a lot of rumors even when she was starting out, she had to live down the reputation of her fascist, in the case of her mother, outright Nazi sympathies. By the way, her finances in Britain were held up for quite a while after the war. Her mother's finances, but they got money through Audrey Hepburn, right? Maybe that was kind of a backdoor way of doing it. Her finances were held up because she was held under suspicion by the Dutch government for being a traitor during World War II. And she managed to wiggle her way out of it. I don't know if it's legitimate or not. We're going to have to research that more. But she managed to escape. And Audrey Hepburn, thanks to the complicity of the gossip columnists of the time, Hedda Hopper, whoever else was big back then, that part of her life was kept under wraps. It was easier back then. It was more tightly controlled. And there was no Perez Hilton or TMZ, or paparazzi even, so they can control that information. But they still had something on Audrey Hepburn. They, meaning the United Nations, UNESCO, NATO people. And you know how intelligence operators work, right? There's two types of assassination, the technique they use. First, they use character assassination. If that doesn't work, then they'll do the physical assassination. So they had the book on her and say, listen, you've enjoyed a great career. You've had a great life thanks to us. We raised you up for nothing. You didn't even have any acting ability. You were good. You were a ballet dancer and you're a pretty girl, but we're going to lay out the whole Nazi portfolio on the entire world and permanently ruin your reputation for generations to come, unless this is the proverbial offer you can't refuse, unless you become our goodwill ambassador for UNICEF, right? Which would you pick? And I'll ask myself the same question. What would I, if given that dilemma, would I choose to go out as a fondly remembered heroine of humanitarian efforts the world over, who cared for children, starving children all over the world? Or would I want to be known as part of a family of Nazis who ratted out their own countrymen for execution, even their own family members? By the way, the von Hinsdale family did suffer. I don't know if her mother ratted them out or what the circumstances, but her own Uncle Otto, she was very fond of him, was rounded up, taken, sequestered to a purloined bank building or some public building, and they took, I think it was like close to 500 of the most prominent citizens and held them there as hostage so there would be no resistance movement like happened in France. If there was a resistance movement, then these upstanding citizens, these Dutch citizens, would be murdered. They'd be executed. In any terrorist attack, there would be a murder of these hostages, one of which was her uncle, who was killed, by the way, as part of this collective punishment system. There was terrorism by these partisans, Dutch partisans, anti-Nazi, right? Doing sabotage, targeted assassination, the usual. And her own uncle was killed as part of this process. So she was thin. She's known for being thin, right? She wasn't thin right after the war because she just ate everything in sight because she was living under starvation conditions through most of the war. By the way, a third of this book talks about the war itself. I think this person is primarily a military historian, and her son, who's the son of Audrey Hepburn and her Italian, I think he was an Italian psychiatrist. He provided the personal, maybe the papers to talk about her wartime experience, and they combined it together. But the point is that Audrey Hepburn herself did suffer a good deal of deprivation during the war. That's why I'm hesitant in just saying that she's an outright war criminal. She's not. I don't think she's even close to it. I mean, she was 15 when the war ended, too, and she was 13 when she was still dancing all the way through it. She was taking ballet lessons, and part of her war record is that she was keeping morale up by doing ballet for the local citizenry. Maybe so. Maybe there's a use, and I would think so. You have to try to, just like our own quarantine for the last 2 years, you try to live your life as normally as possible, but with the understanding that you're under siege, right? Right. She was living under the regime of kinetic warfare. We've been living under the regime over 2 years now of genetic warfare. This is why her story is germane to us. And this is why I told the story of her uncle Otto and the 500 upstanding citizens of the Netherlands, of Holland, who never would have imagined they'd wind up in a concentration camp. They were good citizens. They were Dutch too. They were stoic. They were hardworking. They were intelligent and bright, dedicated, and they weren't into ostentatious wealth. They were Calvinists. They knew that they were preordained to do, but they were good to other people. And they wound up in a concentration camp, right? This is exactly what's going on here in America. And it's going to happen to the people who think that they're on the winning side. You're going to wind up in a United Nations / NATO concentration camp. And when there's a spontaneous uprising in the American hinterland, you will be the ones who are executed as part of the collective punishment process. All right. So come on our side right now because let's learn from history. It only happens one time through, but we can continually learn. The lessons can be renewed and replenished. Of course, they might have more subtle ways of getting rid of people, like, I won't name their names, but they could use bacteriological agents rather than lining people up against the wall and getting rid of them. So let me wrap up here with her parents and whatnot. Let me show you a short film, and don't tune out because I'll come back and comment on it, that talks about her glory after she finished her Hollywood career as a goodwill ambassador. And by the way, I know who you're thinking about when you're watching this film. You're thinking of people like Angelina Jolie or that great international human rights lawyer, Amal Clooney, right? Or all these poster children for these globalist organizations, Planned Parenthood, United Nations. Let's withdraw, just like we withdrew our support from the so-called Motion Picture Academy of Arts, where you have to have these fake fights staged so people will start talking about it. They're that desperate. Just like we withdrew support from that particular hegemonic control system of staged, engineered mind control via movies, let's withdraw from UNICEF. Let's withdraw from UNESCO. Let's withdraw from the United Nations. Let's just withhold. We don't even have to do it. We will just withhold our attention, our energies. You'll watch me instead. You'll watch my TubeU channel grow exponentially while the Fresh Prince, his popularity goes down and down and down. Okay, let's take a look at the promo of the UNICEF.
In 1953, the year Audrey made Sabrina, fellow Paramount star Danny Kaye became the first Goodwill Ambassador for UNICEF. He toured the world, creating awareness of the organization's work, pushing it into public consciousness. From this beginning, UNICEF's Goodwill Ambassadors grew into a legion of celebrities who have continued to donate their time for the sake of the world's children. In 1989, Audrey Hepburn volunteered her services to UNICEF. For Audrey, it was an easy decision. As a child in war-torn Holland, the United Nations had come into the newly liberated country, distributing food to the starving, including herself. Audrey's time with UNICEF filled her life for her last years before she died. She tirelessly and bravely toured distant and dangerous parts of the world, often areas torn apart by ongoing civil war.
Ooh, what was that? Fireworks.
Somalia, un paese in un stato di bisogno disperato. Sono Audrey Hepburn.
Appealing to the public in English, Italian, French and other languages, she made public service announcements asking for support. She gave press conferences where her heartfelt words stirred world-weary journalists.
Miss Audrey Hepburn.
She appeared at fundraisers, testified before the US Congress, launched reports, hosted ceremonies, gave numerous speeches and press interviews, and even designed fundraising cards. All this for a salary of $1 a year. Audrey's time away for UNICEF was often extremely difficult for her. The suffering was hard to bear, especially when she saw so many children giving up on life, and babies too weak to live beyond a couple of months. Conditions were tough. In areas ravaged by endless famine, it was hot, dry and dusty, with no relief from the heat. Flies crawled all over the faces of children and blighted what little food there was. People struggled to save just a shred of dignity as they crammed together in their thousands in camps. But Audrey ploughed on, unwilling to give up on these people. She gave them dignity as she gently talked to them about clean water, education and health. She immunized children, fed the starving, spoke with the people and above all, cared.
She immunized the children, enough said. Right. Now, if you was Hillary Clinton with the Clinton Foundation or Bill Clinton, or what was that woman who spirited out and Haitian kids, just took them right back to America and pimped them out? That you would think nothing about it. But you know what? I sincerely believe that Audrey Hepburn had a humanitarian heart. I think she believed in her missions. She was sincere. But she was also a very intelligent, bright, brilliant, empathetic person. She's highly intelligent. She had school, but a lot of us do. But she knew the score. And her last mission to Somalia was a real heartbreaker for her. She had a breakdown. She was thrown into a very, very deep depression. And again, this is conjecture on my part, but I think she was working up to go public about trying to get at the real root issues of this misery on a massive scale. I think maybe she might not have the answer, but I think she was going to raise the question, why do we, the the civilized world, the first world, so-called, why do we even need UNICEF? Because after she was depressed, terrible state of mind, shortly after she came back her final trip overseas, within a matter of months, she was dead of cancer, abdominal or intestinal. I don't know the specific. I think it was in the intestinal region of cancer. Right. We need to look at the medical records if they're available. Check out it. Ask professionals forensically what their assessment is. It's kind of unusual for a person of that stature who has the finest medical care that you can imagine, right? Getting checkups frequently. And perhaps there was no cure by the time it happened, but certainly there could have been some sort of intervention. That's what I'm thinking when I'm trying to figure out what happened in her toward the end of her life. And she was dead by age 63. I think she died back in 1993. So this story, the saga is going on in 2022 because the misery that's being inflicted by this part of the world and soon coming to America by all these different embargoes and the giant global economic slowdown is going to result in massive hardship on it already is happening, different populations throughout the entire world, soon coming to America, right? Even a prosperous country like the United States of America, because, hey, Holland was a prosperous country, right? From extracting all the resources from the world over and bringing it back and hiring Rembrandt van Rijn, either, and having him paint these beautiful portraits of the prosperous Dutch masters, right? The burgomeisters, right? Even that country was brought down by the new world order system in the post-war period. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm reading your encouraging comments here. Thank you very much for your support. I hope you will ponder some of these thoughts here and share this presentation, this talk with people you know. And let's join together in figuring out who the Natalie or the I'm sorry, I'm going to talk about Natalie Wood. I think I'm going to have to now. Who are the Audrey Hepburns of the present, right? I did talk on Sharon Stone. I'm talking about the death of the compassion industry. And you know what? Maybe the best hope for the starving people of the world is for us to walk away, to withhold any sort of support for these compassion companies. By the way, UNICEF, I just looked up, UNICEF has a huge annual budget in 2021. Let me see what it is here very quickly. Oh, yeah, in 2020, guess what its total income was, UNICEF? $7.2 billion. That's right. I said billion, not million. $7.2 billion. That's more than Will Smith makes. No, he's peanuts and he's on his way down. You can tell he's so desperate. Him and his swinging wife, Jada Pinkett Smith. Oh, yeah, I put her name in my mouth. Jada Pinkett Smith. All right. And who's the other dude? Chris Rock? Yeah, the comedian dude. He got bitch slapped. All right. That's exactly what the power structure wants. They want to see black people bitch slapping each other, right? It's just like they want to see starving Africans here. $7.2 billion. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We got a lot to ponder. And solution is very simple. Just withhold consent, withhold support. Goes a long way. It's resistance. And the brave patriotic Dutch people and the brave patriotic British people and the Americans of World War II and all the different countries, they had under starvation conditions, having their own relatives taken away concentration camps, right, or executed or deported, or she had an older brother, her mother had her younger brother sent to Berlin to work in a munitions factory as a slave labor, right? They held course and they were able to prevail, just as we are going to prevail from the current genetic warfare being waged against the entire planet of our fellow human beings. With that, ladies and gentlemen, peace I love you all. God willing, we'll be back Thursday with, yes, indeed, an incredible live interview. See you then. Take care. Bye.